Well, good afternoon, and thank you for joining us for day 2 of our boot camp in conjunction with the EveryLife Foundation. For those who could not join us yesterday, we will have the recordings available, so you'll be able to catch up. But yesterday, Claire and Dylan talked about the landscape of newborn screening in the United States, what it looks like on the federal level, how the states implement those conditions. And today they're going to focus more on advocacy. So we will pass it off to Dylan.
Happy to get started. And thank you guys so much for coming back today. Really excited to speak with you guys today about the role of advocacy. And specifically when talking about newborn screening, it's important to note how there's both a federal and state role. So I know we talked a lot about that yesterday in terms of how newborn screening does occur both at federal and state levels, but that advocacy also takes that next step as well. And so it's always good to kind of know where everything is. And so we talked a little bit about that yesterday, but I'll talk more about that today. And to do that, we'll talk a little about some legislation that we worked on, just to kind of use that as an example. But again, throughout the presentation, if you have any questions, please don't hesitate to throw in the chat or to speak up. Happy to kind of answer them along the way or answer them all at the end as well. So with that, I will share my screen. And we should get going. That is actually the end of the presentation. There we go. That's the start. Okay. Perfect. So advocating for newborn screening. I think the first thing to start off about is the importance and the impact of grassroots advocacy. I know it can sound a little cliche at times, but it is true. You do have power to affect change. And what I always like to know when talking about the importance of advocacy is advocacy can mean a lot of different things to a lot of different people. But at the end of the day is that there's a role for every advocate. If you want to speak up, if you want to get involved, if you want to participate in newborn screening advocacy, there is a role for you. And so it's just sorting out after today's conversation, what is that role? Is it meeting in person with an advocate? Is it contacting them by email? Is it just posting on social media? Every part of it plays a role because so much of advocacy is speaking up and acting as an educator or trainer or just being a resource and ensuring the fact that both state and federal legislators, as well as executive officials, are aware of the issues that you care about. Because they want to hear from you. You are your greatest advocate. They want to hear from their constituents. They want to make sure that they are focusing on issues that matter to the people that they are governing on behalf of. And so making sure that your voice is being heard is such an important part because nobody knows your story like you. You know your story the best. And so much of advocacy is telling your story. I work in DC full time. This is my job, and I will speak with legislators and their staff on a weekly basis. And I can give them all the one-pagers and all the stats in the world and provide them with information, but nothing really impacts them like stories from their constituents. And so you want to be able to tell your story when possible in a variety of different ways. And it really gets back to the idea that every effort to advocate matters. Again, no matter how little, no matter how large or how small, every effort moves the needle forward. And so it's really kind of gets to the idea of you do have that impact. You can have that impact, and you do have the power to affect change. And we do have some information that backs that up. You can see here from previous poll, why relationships matters. This was talking about in terms of how much of a positive influence these various ways to interact with legislative staff has on the ability to move legislation forward. And you can see there from the top two that it's working with their constituents, not hearing from me. As you can see there, visit from a lobbyist is right in the middle. And it's in-person visits or contact with constituent representatives has such a huge role within this. And it's really important part of why relationships matter and play such a huge role. And so we'll talk a little bit today about how to build those relationships, how to maintain those relationships, and recognizing what those various aspects can look like. But I want to also talk a little bit today, kind of talking with some of those numbers, because having these numbers is an important part, but it's also finding a way to utilize these numbers into your story. So in talking about U.S. rare disease prevalence, how there's over 7,000 rare diseases, approximately 30 million affected. But those stats are great and they're needed in part, but they don't tell the full story. So we'll talk a little bit more about that today, about how you want to take some of these data points and use them within your story. In addition, quite often economic data is always great to bring to your legislators and their staff. They want to know what the cost is and what the ROI is, or return on investment. And so here you can see with rare diseases, and this all is coming from the National Economic Burden of Rare Disease study that we put out last year, that in 2019 alone, the cost, the total economic burden for the health system was nearly $1 trillion. And that was looking at just 379 rare diseases. And so that really impacts the economic burden of rare disease on the healthcare system, and really advocates for why we need these new policies. And you can really see as we break it down between direct and indirect costs, that it does vary. So direct costs are ones that we often hear about. How much does it cost to go to the doctor? How much does it cost for your prescription drugs? But those are important aspects. But what we know as advocates, that doesn't tell the full story. And so we also want to include indirect costs. So what are the productivity losses? What happens when a parent needs to resign from their job to become a full-time caretaker? What is that cost? And as well as what is the non-medical and uncovered cost? What happens if you have to build a ramp to your home to accommodate a wheelchair? It's stuff like that. So we want to make sure that we encompass the entire aspect of rare diseases. And lastly, focusing a little more on newborn screening, we're talking a little bit about the diagnostic odyssey. And so you can see here the bottom statistic where it takes on average 6.3 years to receive that initial rare disease diagnosis on average after first symptoms. And so it really highlights how impactful newborn screening can be, because you're trying to eliminate that diagnostic odyssey and trying to really limit those years, as well as the fact that on average, after rare disease first symptom, a patient will visit approximately 17 number of specialists. And so as you can try to bring the number down, because a lot of those are being done as you're trying to find that diagnosis. And so again, these are all fantastic statistics, and they really help to tell the story, or they really help to support the story. But what you wanted to be able to do is be able to connect these not only to your legislation, but to your story as well. And so I'll move on to the next slide, and we'll talk a little bit about the Newborn Screening Saves Lives Reauthorization Act. And so as we're talking today at the federal level, I would think about how the numbers I talked about previously can play a role in talking here, as well as how your story can play a role into that. Because when talking about piece of legislation, whether at the state or federal level, these are the things that you're going to want to incorporate. And so first, having a little background on the bill is always good. It was originally passed in 2008 and was reauthorized in 2014. And this helps to set federal newborn screening guidelines, as well as create federal newborn screening programs, which we talked about yesterday. But the current reauthorization actually remains expired as of September of 2019. The House has passed the legislation twice now, but the Senate language is still pending as a result of an informed consent amendment that would require patients to opt in to allow for newborns' unidentified dry blood spots to be used for research. This would create a high burden on hospitals, and that would result in them likely choosing to not participate in the collection of dry blood spot research. And that's would have a huge impact, because those dry blood spots not only play a role in quality assurance, but they also play a role in rare disease research to develop new screening methods and new therapeutics for conditions not yet a part of newborn screening. So it's important to kind of know a little bit about the history and also talk about some of the key bill provisions. So again, it would reauthorize those HRSA grants to expand and improve their screening programs to help educate parents and healthcare providers and improve follow-up care for infants with detected condition. In addition, it would reauthorize the advisory committee that we talked about yesterday, as well as make some improvements around the RUSP. Lastly, it directs the National Academy of Medicine to conduct a study on how to modernize the newborn screening program. This is a really key part of the legislation, as it helps to push newborn screening forward. We know that newborn screening is one of the more successful public health programs in this country, but we also know with the incoming influx of cell and gene therapies that more and more conditions will seek out newborn screening as a diagnostic tool, and that the current system is not prepared to withstand that influx. And so we want to study now, or at that point of view where we can start to make those changes and start to prepare for how we can improve and modernize the system to withstand that. And so currently, the bill did pass the House last June, almost a year ago at this point, and health since it is priority, so we're still working with them to get it passed. And so that's the current status of the authorization. But now I want to talk a little about how to advocate for policy. And so we walked through some of the statistics that you can use, or we walked through the bill itself. But as you can see, we started with how to create relationships. And so that's what we want to talk about for the next few moments, is how to advocate for policy and how to go about that. So you're going to want to, again, create that relationships. So we'll talk about a little bit of that on the next slide, but that's such a key part of state and federal advocacy, is building on those relationships, reaching out to your legislative staff to be that resource, to be that educator, to tell your story, to let them know what is important to you and to your community. And it's important to maintain those relationships as best you can. So don't hesitate to follow up with them. We'll talk a little bit more of that when we talk about actually meeting with the staff. In addition, when you want to share your story with a policy ask, you don't want to just share your story and not let them know why you're sharing your story. You also don't want to come with just an ask, no context. You want to use them both together. In addition, ask questions. You keep them up to date and force them to kind of answer those questions. Why is the bill stalled out? Why aren't we doing more here? Quite often they will have answers, and those will be helpful answers. But as a patient advocate, you want to know what the challenges are around that reauthorization or around a piece of policy, to ensure the fact that you can be as helpful as possible. If the reason it's stalled out is because there isn't enough funding, well, that's your answer. And now you can focus on, okay, here's how I can help try to increase funding for this program. In addition, you want to engage in resourceful organizations to support you, such as the ones that we're from today. There are many disease-specific organizations, there are class of disease-specific organizations, and there are overall kind of community organizations. And so you want to engage with those organizations just to help support you in your ask in terms of preparing for those meetings, as well as to help set up those meetings. And so don't be afraid to kind of reach out and build that coalition and work towards working together towards that end goal, which gets to the last one, is supporting others with their policy goals when they align. And activate your own network. You do have one. It's your family, it's your friends, it's your community. And so work with them to advocate for legislation and for policy that you care about. And there are a variety of ways to engage. You can see here, there are in-person meetings, briefings, letters and emails, phone calls, virtual town halls, virtual meetings. But at the end of the day, the key part is to make it personal. Let them know why you are advocating for this policy. Let them know why this is important to you and why you have taken time out of your day to meet with them. They are very busy people, and they will have many meetings in a given day. And so you want to make sure that you're telling them why this is so important to you and why you're asking them to work on this issue. In addition, you will have the opportunity at times to speak with legislators. So contact their office by email, phone, or Zoom, or in person. And you can always ask me with the legislator. All they can do is say no. Quite often, speaking with a legislator as a lobbyist will be difficult for us, but as a constituent, it happens much more often. And so if you say, I'm a constituent of Senator, so I'm originally from New Jersey, and so if I say, my parents call up their Senator Cory Booker's office and say, I would love to speak to you to speak about rare disease issues, there's a chance that they will be able to meet with the senator. All they can do is say, unfortunately, the senator is too busy, but we would love for you to speak with our health staffer. And so that gets us to the next point of kind of how to prepare for those meetings. You want to have a specific ask. It's a critical part of a successful meeting with a member of Congress, both at the federal and state level, because it ensures the fact that the staff will know, okay, here they will have that highlight takeaway. I met with Dylan Simon, and he wants us to support the newborn screening reauthorization. That is a specific ask, as opposed to if I met with them and I didn't have an ask and I just spoke about rare diseases, they'll be educated, which is great, but they won't know what to do with that information. So you want to be able to guide them to that, because legislative staff are very busy and very are asked to focus on a lot of issues. At the federal level, in the Senate side, you'll have a staff who has to focus on the entire healthcare system. At the House level, you'll have a staff that not only has to focus on healthcare, but also potentially energy issues or NASA or appropriations. And so they have to cover a variety of issues. And if you're getting down to the state level, then you have one staff who may have to cover the entire portfolio of their member. And so the reason I say this is just to highlight that they are busy. And so if you can make their lives as easy as possible by saying, this is what I'm asking for. I'm asking you to support this legislation, or I'm asking you to join this caucus. It can go so far, because it ensures the fact that they know what is being asked of them, which can be so helpful. Next is how to prepare a one-pager. Quite often, as I talked earlier, a lot of these organizations will have one-pagers, but the goal of this is just to create a quick summary of what you're asking about. We want to provide some clear information on what you're asking and the background information. So you want to explain your organization, your disease, or the reason you are there today. A brief summary of what the legislation is and what it will do and what your ask is, and how they can be helpful. And so it's really important to have these because it ensures the fact that when the staff wants to return to this issue a week, 2 weeks, 3 months from then, that they have the information they need to be like, oh, right, this is what we need to do. Let's see what I can do to get this done. And you can see here there, we actually have some tools to help with this. You can see there at the advocacy.org/tools is a way to kind of help you make that one pager. In addition, prior to meeting with a member, you want to learn about that member. What do they work on? So especially looking in healthcare, quite often within the healthcare space, both state and federal members will focus on a small variety of issues. They can't focus on the entire healthcare system. That's just too much. And so it's good to know what they've worked on in the past in the healthcare space. You want to learn about the bills that you want to discuss and know their bill numbers, especially at the state and federal level. There can be hundreds, if not thousands, of bills being introduced in a single session. So if you can go and say, Senator, the newborn screening reauthorization is Senate Bill 350. You will see in that meeting, they will jot that down immediately because it makes their lives exponentially easier to not have to go try to get the right keywords, try to remember the full title of the bill. They can just type in 350 into the Congress.gov search and the bill will come up. In addition, you want to coordinate with your team before the meeting, determine who will make each ask. So this is if you're going with a coalition, you want to make sure that you have it, you're ready to go. Quite often you will only get 30 minutes with a member or their staff, sometimes as short as 15. And so you want to make sure that you have a plan for how to approach that meeting. In addition, practice your story. That is a big part of this. I will say from my own personal experience, my first Hill meeting with the staffer, I was not aware that my manager was going to ask me to speak, and she asked me to talk about biomedical research, and I rambled on for way too long. It made no sense. I did not practice my ask. I did not practice my story, and it was to be quite honest, pretty terrible. And so practicing that is so important because it allows for you on that spot to be ready to go. And so from then on, I always try to right before a meeting, just quickly remind, okay, here's what we're asking for, here's what we want to do, just to make sure I'm aware of what I want to get out of this meeting. And so when you're actually in the meeting itself, give a quick round of introductions. Often when meeting with legislative staff, you want to let them know where you live if you're their constituent, so it's helpful. As well as talking about your personal stories and how it would impact not only you, but the community as well. And then you want to move into your legislative asks and your thank yous. And there is a mock meeting at that same link that we talked about earlier, where you can watch how to go about a meeting if you're meeting with federal or state staff. So if you want to share what you want to do during the meeting, to share a picture of the patient, whether if it was you or you're advocating for a family member or a friend, you want to share that fact sheet that we discussed earlier. You want to share your contact information. Again, this goes back to being a resource. If they come back to this in 2 months and we're like, I know I spoke to Dylan about this, but I don't remember some of the details, but I do want to get involved. If they have, oh, right, I have his email address. They can just shoot me a quick email, and because it's something that I work on a lot, I can answer that question much more quickly than them sorting through their notes or trying to Google the information. So you want to be that resource, and you want to make sure they have your contact information. What to do during the meeting to be successful? Again, arrive early. That includes Zoom. I would say be there on time. Smile and be respectful of the member staff. I know this just goes a long way to make sure, just to leave that good memory within the staff or the member themselves. They are busy people, and so just be respectful of their time. as well as thank the member if he or she has supported rare disease legislation in the past. You want to make sure that you are thanking them for their efforts. If they have been champions, thank them for being champions. If they have supported a single piece of legislation that you care about, thank them for that as well. It can go a long way. And lastly, do your best to avoid talking politics. Rare disease is a nonpartisan issue, and we need champions in both parties. So you want to avoid saying why one party is better than the other, or why you expect them to support this because they're a member of a set party. You want to avoid talking politics. You want to talk about the issues, talk about your stories, and talk about the acts. And I can say I have never experienced a situation where when I was keeping a meeting nonpartisan in which a staffer or a member themselves turn it into a partisan conversation. They will feed off of the mood that you are giving them, and if you're advocating in a nonpartisan fashion, they will keep the meeting in a nonpartisan fashion, which can only work to help advocate for your condition, because as I said, we do need champions in both parties. Answering tough questions. It's going to happen. It happens to everybody. I have been in the meetings with managers and lobbyists who I respect, who have been in this field for 30 years, and they'll get asked a question and they will have no idea, and that is okay. Staffers do not expect you to have information ready at your fingertips. If it is there, they're great, but essentially what they want to do is they're asking you to be their resource. So if you do not know, let them know you do not know. You do not want to lie to them. You do not want to equivocate. You just want to say, that's a great question. I actually don't have the answer for you right now. Let me see if I can go find that answer to your question. I'll get back to you in the coming days. Again, that's helpful. When they're asking those questions, they just want to be informed. The more thoughtful the question, the more in-depth the question, that can be more of a chance that you may not know the answer, but also signifies the fact that they're thinking about this in a critical way and want to be supportive of this legislation. So don't be afraid to say, I do not know, but you can always get that information and say, you'll hear from me in the coming days with an answer to your question. In addition, what happens if the member is not supportive of your acts? Again, be respectful and courteous. I'm sorry you feel that way. Hopefully it's something we can work together on in the future. There is not one way to approach rare disease policy and advocacy. And so they don't support one piece of legislation. See if they can work with them on another. You want to keep that line of communication open because you want to see if they can be a resource somewhere else. I know from work experience currently, there's a bill that we are focusing on. There are two different bills that we're looking at, one of which there's a single senator who is standing in the way, and one of which where a single senator is probably going to be a great champion. And so that's just the way they cook the sometimes. So you want to be respectful and courteous and keep those lines of communications open. What to do after meeting? Send a written note, thank you note to the member staffer. An email will work as well. Post on social media thanking them for taking the time to meet with you, as well as send that follow-up email. Again, it goes back to what we've talked a lot about today in terms of you want to be that resource, and you want to be there for them. And so make sure you're following up with them in the following days and following weeks to see, hey, just want to check in. Do you need anything else from me? How is this progressing? So on and so forth. So I think, again, being that resource and being there for them can be such an important role. We will next move to kind of talk about some state aspects. And within states, a big part of state advocacy is working with newborn screening advisory boards. The state in which you live can determine what conditions are screened for through these advisory boards. And so as you look at a condition at your state newborn screening panel, you first want to determine if your state has a newborn screening advisory board. These boards are typically the ones who are making the screening recommendations, although not in every state. However, these newborn screening boards do exist currently in 48 states. And so most likely you are living in a state with an advisory board. So it's always great to check in with them and see kind of what the status is around adding condition and what they're working on. And again, it goes back to you want to build a relationship with these board members, attend meetings consistently, share your story by public comment, be prepared to answer disease-specific questions. As we talked about yesterday, they will often be newborn screening experts, but not necessarily disease-specific questions experts. And so you want to be there to help answer those questions. And remember to be patient. I think that's a key part in both working with legislative staffers as well as executive staffers. They are quite literally running a government, and they have a lot of work to do and are quite busy, and you want to be patient but proactive. I think a lot of advocacy is finding that fine line of pushing them to be better and to do better and to better serve the community, while also recognizing the fact that things cannot be done within a day or two. They take time, and so it's finding that balance to really work with them. And so again, which gets to the idea of who you're reaching out to. So you want to identify key stakeholders. So we're going to utilize newborn screening, but when advocating for any rare disease issue, you want to identify who are the stakeholders in your space. So within newborn screening, at the forefront is the child. It's always important when talking about an issue, identifying stakeholders, who is the key individual that you want to advocate on behalf of. There are other members who will be involved, but who is the overarching goal? And that for newborn screening is the child. And you're going to recognize the fact that there are parents, there are the patient advocacy groups, the payers, state health labs, academic researchers, the federal advisory committee, legislators. All of these stakeholders play a unique role within newborn screening. It's important to know kind of what that role is. And so whenever you're doing this, it's not necessarily, you don't need an in-depth exercise, you don't need to create a 10-page document on what everybody's doing, but it's important to kind of know going in, okay, here's generally who's going to be involved in this issue, and here's generally what their role is. And quite often when creating a state newborn screening coalition, you're going to start with patient advocacy groups and parents. And so that's always a great place to start, is with patient and parent advocates to really work with local communities to build up support for new conditions being added to panels. And so you want to work with the local community, and starting there is such a key part. But following that, you're going to then want to recognize who you want to reach out to. So it's going to be legislators, state health labs, and academic researchers. And they all play a unique role. But you want to work with these stakeholders to ask them, okay, what are the hurdles we need to overcome to add a condition? You want, again, acting as that resource. Okay, you say that there is not enough appropriations. So if you go to the state health lab department and they're like, we would love to add CRAB-A as a condition, we think it's ready, but we just don't have the funds. And you can go as an advocate, great, I already have a relationship with a state senator, and I can bring this to them and talk to them how we need to appropriate additional funds to the state lab to ensure the fact that we can add CRAB-A. So I think that's, again, that goes back to those relationships where you want to be that resource to them, and to both legislators and state health lab departments to find out, okay, what is needed to get this done? So we want to work with them. But in addition, when working with legislators, there are a variety of different ways you can work to communicate with them. And so action alerts can be such a huge role because you can never, you're never going to create a relationship with every federal official who represents you, as well as every state official. There's a lot of people, and then that doesn't even include those who represent you, then going outside of who your direct number is. And so you're going to want to create ways to contact state representatives and senators. And so creating these action alerts to notify them about the importance of this issue. So creating ways for different members of your community to reach out to state representatives, state senators to talk to them, okay, please support this piece of legislation, have that ask in place so that they've heard about this legislation. So when it comes up for a vote, they're like, right, I know this is so important. I'm going to support this piece of legislation. In addition, you can create community letters of support. Right? This is always great to share with champions in your space to kind of signify, here is who is supporting you. Here is who wants to see this get done and who is supporting you in this effort to pass this, which is always great to signify. And lastly, social media as an advocacy tool. I will admit, I am not the most active social media member as a personal user, but as whether or not you're active as an individual, it is important as an advocate. So you want to use social media for your advocacy to make them aware of the problems that you face. Thank them for actions that they take, thank them for meeting you, and thank them for what they're doing, as well as let them know here's an issue that we are facing. And so it's a great way to kind of informally stay in contact. But obviously, I walked through a lot today, so kind of happy to answer any of your questions around advocacy in terms of how to work with legislators or state health labs, how best to build your coalitions. I think with that, I'll stop sharing my screen and happy to answer any questions. What are some examples of effective events to help raise public awareness for rare diseases? I would say, when possible, build off existing events. So again, citing newborn screening as an example, I would say there are two great ways. Rare Disease Day, which is technically February 29th, but often celebrated on February 28th, is a great way to kind of build upon some of the great work and highlight the importance of rare diseases at an event either at the Capitol or off the Capitol. In addition, in September is Newborn Screening Awareness Month. And so highlighting that, building off that work and saying, I want to thank you so much for all your effort, but we want to make sure that you're properly educated on this issue. And so holding an event there can be really impactful.
And just to add to that real quick, Dylan, so on building off of existing infrastructure and things that people are already doing, going back to what you were saying about social media, EveryLife is always posting, share those posts. You know, you don't have to create content by yourself. If it already exists and there's things that you want to share and tell your network about, use the content that EveryLife is creating, use the content that LDNBS is creating, use the content that other rare disease organizations are already posting.
What is the right size group to meet with your representatives? That's a great question. There is not, unfortunately, I cannot give you the best answer is it depends. Actually, I'm gonna take that back. Every group can be a good group, but it's just more of knowing based on your size how best to approach the meeting. So if you're going with a larger group, that gets back to the idea of making sure you're coordinating your ask to begin with. If I've been in meetings where they had 30, 40 members, which was fantastic to highlight the support for the issue. And I've been in 2 meetings such as that, one of which where they did not meet and they were talking over each other a little bit, and one of which where they did meet and it was running like they've been doing this for 25 years. They had their ask ready to go. And so when you have larger meetings like that, it can be so impactful because it can highlight that there is such broad support for this issue. But you want to make sure that you have worked with each other ahead of time to make sure that you're not talking over each other and you have a schedule of events. If you are in a smaller meeting, I've been in meetings with only 1 or 2 people. And that is more, I would say, just being aware of that, and it gives you the opportunity to get a little more detail of your story. Quite often, if you're in those larger meetings, you have to give a 30-second to 1-minute kind of overview of your story, which can be quite difficult. Whereas if you're in a 30-minute meeting and there's only 2 advocates, you can get into a little more of the detail of your personal story and how legislation would have either impacted you or would have impacted you. And so I think it's less about which is the best size, and it's more about knowing, okay, we have a large meeting or we have a small meeting, this is how we need to approach the situation. That's a great question. Another thing I'll note, just in the world we currently live in a current pandemic, post-pandemic, however you view the world, obviously advocating for issues changes a little bit. Meeting in person is much harder, if not outright impossible at this point, depending on what state you live in, depending on the member. And so it's all that more important to remain that resource and to be active with them. As we're all aware, like being in person can really help to build those relationships and help to create that personal relationship. But losing that can be tricky, but it's just more of taking the time to stay active and to follow up with them. I once had a Hill staffer give me great advice. And he said, the second that you believe that you are being annoying in your emails is when you're in a good spot. He was like, we are very busy people. He's like, there'll be times where I will look at my inbox, see an email, be like, oh, I think I would love to respond to that, but like I need to think about it a little bit. And then he gets sidetracked, and by the time he gets back to his inbox, it's 50 emails down, and he just has forgotten about it because not because he wanted to, just because the day got away from him. I think we can all appreciate that there are times where just like the day gets away from you and you lose track of what you want to work on. And so not being afraid to follow up multiple times in a month is okay. and finding that balance. Obviously, you don't want to be in their inbox every day, but working to find that balance, and that's okay. That's okay to ask them. Want to follow up with you? Is it okay if I follow up with you multiple times over the course of the next few months? And they'll be happy to tell you, be like, you know what, follow up with me in 2 months. I'm really busy right now, and this is not an issue that's going to be solved in the next 2 months. Please follow up with me later. I think a really good example of that would be in September is at the federal level is quite often when they're putting the finishing touches on the federal budget. And so if you're coming to talk about a bill that doesn't have to do with the budget, it's not that they don't want to hear about it. It's more of at that time, they're not going to get their boss's time. Their boss doesn't have the time to talk about that issue. And so they might say, you know what, I really love this. And I think the member will care about this, but can you follow up with us in mid-October? Because that's when I think we can really make an impact. So sometimes they'll give you that answer. Do states hold yearly advocacy panel or boards where they take time to listen to families and scientists about various rare diseases? Or do they need to be specifically scheduled in advance with your state reps? They do not. I will say the transparency of some of these boards is not great in terms of announcing their meetings. But that is not because they don't want you there. That's just could be a bandwidth, could be a tech issue, could be a lot of things. And so they do generally hold regularly scheduled, either generally 2 to 4 times a year. And so just reaching out to the newborn screening program or the newborn screening advisory council and just asking them when their next meeting is the best way to go about it. If you are having issues getting in contact with them or they're not meeting regularly, that's where you might want to pull in your state rep and get them to kind of help out and see what's going on. But generally, they do meet regularly and they do want patient advocates to come and speak about the issues that they care about. That is a question in the chat for Lisa.
In each state, they have their own newborn screening advisory board, well, in 48 states, and they are run by the Department of Health. They are comprised of experts from all different specialties. So there's, at least in Pennsylvania, there's a couple of geneticists, there are cardiologists, pediatricians, genetic counselors. So I think there's 15 members on our board, including a parent advocate. And so they usually are organized through the Department of Health. So that is one way to find out where your state does it. I will say my very first advisory board meeting, they were very surprised to see somebody from the public there because it's just not very common, at least here. So like Dylan said, it's usually not that they're trying to keep you from coming. They really just don't think about people wanting to come. Also, I was going to say to Katie's point, about the state events. So almost every February, the National Organization on Rare Disorders, or NORD, organizes state rare disease advocacy days in each state. So you can also look at NORD's website or social media to see when they're hosting one in your state, but I've attended several here in Pennsylvania and they kind of set the meetings up for you. So it's actually really nice to get active that way. Oh, and then Melanie asked me, okay. So just to give you an example of how this can play out in the state, I'll quickly share my story since I don't know everybody on here. My daughter was diagnosed with Krabbe in 2015. And in 2016, after she passed away, I started attending the advisory board meetings. It was through those meetings that I began to notice that there were bigger problems to solve in Pennsylvania with the newborn screening program than just the fact that they were not screening for Krabbe. So I worked with the newborn screening advisory board, with legislators, and it took us 3 attempts over 6 years, and it was a whole mess, but I've learned so much because of that. But in 2020, we finally implemented we got our bill signed, I should say, implemented in 2021, our legislation that actually empowered and strengthened the newborn screening program in Pennsylvania, which is now allowing for conditions like Krabbe to be screened for. It paved the way for MLD when it comes down the line, which hopefully will be in the next year or two. So sometimes the issues that you need to solve do require legislation because you need to restructure something like we did. It was a big undertaking, but now We have improved equity, access, and the pathway for conditions to be added here. So I definitely advise you or encourage you to engage with your advisory board, because I have found ours to be so open and willing to work, but sometimes their hands are tied and they can't. Like, I was the only one who was able to go and lobby. The Department of Health is not allowed to. Most of the doctors had restrictions put on them by their institutions. And so it became me, me trying to do this. So just be aware of that too. It's not that they don't care. Sometimes they just can't help you like that.
To answer the question in terms of who runs the advisory council, again, it's going to vary a little bit by state. They tend to sit within newborn screening programs themselves. And so that is generally who runs them, I think is the simplest way to put it. Does anybody have any other questions in terms of how to prepare for a meeting or in terms of what goes on in the meeting itself? Happy to answer any questions there. One other thing I just wanted to note in terms of when advocating for rare disease legislation, while some of these, talking about this often, we're talking about kind of broader issues around newborn screening, and it definitely can be easier at times to have those conversations. It doesn't mean that you shouldn't you shouldn't be afraid to advocate for disease-specific legislation. And so it's just, again, it's finding out what works best for you and what you want, how you want to get involved. Again, go back to what I started today with in terms of there's a role for every advocate, and it's just determining what that role is for you and how you want to best get involved. And in terms of the question I just saw, in terms of the template, I know Claire dropped in the chat earlier. There is a link to our RDLA Advocates tools page, which can really help walk you through how to create a one-pager. And Claire just dropped in again. Thank you, Claire.
Also, since we're talking about the one-pagers, I would like to plug that LDNBS has been doing one-pagers for MLD newborn screening. So if there's any MLD families on this call who would like to share their story, actually I have one up. Maybe I can just share my screen real quick. This is the Illinois one. So we've been talking to MLD families and kind of just like the example that Claire just sent, we have an illustration of the problem. What is MLD? This is how many babies are missed for newborn screening in the state of Illinois each year that's not screened for. This is how long it takes for Illinois to screen for a condition on the RUSP. And then explaining what newborn screening is. This is Lexi. Axel is the young boy here with MLD, and so she shared her story with us, and we've been creating these one-pagers for families featuring their story, and we've been sharing them on social media. We're putting them up on our website. That's a work in progress, but the idea here is that similarly you could print them out and bring them wherever you go, wherever you want to talk to someone about MLD and or newborn screening. So and actually we've been having some meetings with legislators in some of our priority states where we use these one-pagers as a reference to talk about the constituents that are represented in the state with the legislator that we're talking to.
I think Kelly also makes a great point, and to build off Melanie's point, is a lot of organizations will have one-pagers, so I would always start there first. Start with organizations that you trust and organizations you've worked with before, and see if they have one-pagers that already exist. Because I think Melanie, Lisa, and Claire and I can all happily tell you, creating one-pager can be a tedious process at times. While they are extremely impactful, and there's a reason we work on it, creating them at times can be a tough process. And so I would definitely always start with saying, does one exist out there that works for what I need. With that, familiar, Lisa, you have any other questions? I'm happy to answer a few more, but if not, I can turn it back to you guys.
Yeah, I think that was a great overview of meeting etiquette, especially when you're meeting with any sort of decision maker. I think a lot of those points can be extrapolated, not just for legislators specifically, but for anyone that you're talking to about newborn screening who is in some sort of position to be of any help. So thank you for that, Dylan. And I saw Lisa just dropped in the chat. We have a form for folks who are interested in helping us with the one-pagers that I just showcased when I shared my screen. So yeah, I think that concludes our 2-day newborn screening boot camp. I'm so glad that you guys were able to attend, everybody who's listening in right now, and this will be recorded because I know there were a number of folks who weren't able to attend live, but who were very interested. In total, I think we ended up having 30 registrants, which makes me very happy. I mean, for such a small disease group, we're a rare disease, leukodystrophies and lysosomal storage disorders, of course, rare diseases. And to have so many people interested in newborn screening and advocacy is really, really wonderful. So thank you guys all for attending. Lisa, do you have any parting words yourself?
The only thing I would mention is that we are going to be hosting a Facebook Live this summer. Date is still TBD, with some newborn screening advisory board members, because one of the things that we've heard from advocates is that they feel intimidated about approaching them, which I can speak from experience. My first time was intimidating too. So we have asked a few really awesome advisory board members from a few states to come together, and that way we can have them teach us, how do you approach a board? What do they even do? What is their process? Things like that. So if you would like to follow us on social media or stay tuned with our website, we will be announcing that date pretty soon. We're still trying to narrow it down, but we're just grateful that you all are here, and we're grateful to the EveryLife Foundation for providing this content for us.
Yes, thank you so much, Dylan and Claire. You guys have been so helpful and you've provided so much information. I've learned a lot myself, so we really appreciate your help with this.
It's been our pleasure. Thank you for having us.
Alrighty, everyone. I hope you guys have a good weekend. And if you're currently experiencing the heat wave that Dylan and Lisa are experiencing, that you cool down, and we'll be in touch. Hopefully, feel free to reach out to us at any time. I think Dylan and Claire gave their contact info on the slides, and for LDNBS, you can send any emails to info@ldnbs.org. And we'll talk to you guys another time. Bye, everyone.